It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Podcast, available on iHeartRadio every morning and also on Spotify and Apple and wherever you get your podcast from. Tuesday morning, the 18th day for October is with us for 2022. And here is a question for you this morning. Are you protecting and safeguarding the property, the home that you live in right now? Because we all get really busy, especially around the time of launching into a new business. And often we don't think about the various ways, the myriad of ways really, that we can protect the family home. Even me, I'm guilty of it myself when I launched my first business many years ago. At that time, I had the property completely and utterly exposed. Have you done it yourself? And or are you right now thinking, that sounds a little familiar. I'm that person. I've launched a business recently and right now the family home is exposed. So we are going to look at that very question with Sam Saad, who has got some great legal advice for you and me to think about and act on. And it's just so important, because as hard as it is starting a business, it's a whole lot worse if that business fails and the bank swoops in to take you home. Then you're left with no business and no roof over your family. And then you know what the third domino effect is. If you're married, probably divorce. And that is why it's so important to get right.
Informing you every morning from 6:30, 7 days a week on the Real Estate Breakfast.
Well, yesterday we were talking about the positivity there in Melbourne, but not just in Melbourne. There have been some great prices paid for property above the reserve price. Clearance rates are creeping up. And then yesterday I see that Domain reported the pressure on sellers to drop their price expectation is taking its toll, with new data revealing that Brisbane, Darwin, Perth, Melbourne and Sydney homeowners are starting to discount their asking prices at rates, they say, not seen since 2019. Domain's data showed that Sydney is feeling it the most. The average reduction in the asking price of a Sydney house is now at 7.8%. Now that is higher than any other capital city and has been rising steadily since May. A discount, now this is how they can do the maths, a discount of 7.8% on the city's median house price of just over 1.5 million would equate to just over 125,000 off the asking price. And sellers are also dropping their prices in Brisbane, with the highest spikes in discounting occurring in areas like the inner city and Sherwood, while in Melbourne it's buyers in Stonington East that are most likely to get a discount. That's according to yesterday's Domain data. So if you're celebrating your birthday for today, happy birthday. You are sharing it with Jean-Claude Van Damme. He is turning 61. Zac Efron is turning 35, and Martina Navratilova, she is turning 65 years old today.
We talk with leading property commentators with analysis, predictions, forecasts and what's trending every morning from 6:30. It's the Main Centre Forecast with PRD, selling smarter every day.
Let's check on your weather on this Tuesday morning. And in Sydney, good morning to you. 1 or 2 showers this morning, expecting a high of 22 degrees. In Melbourne, expecting a mostly fine and sunny Tuesday with 22. In Brisbane, a morning shower or 2, expecting 25. And in Perth today, expecting a nice, fine, sunny day and also expecting a top of 25 degrees.
It's your weekday real estate breakfast with news, interviews and predictions every morning on the Real Estate Podcast.
Well, in the current economic climate we are all living in at the moment, a lot of people are restructuring their assets to ensure their property is protected from their business. And some haven't even given this a single thought, but you should really take a look at it. It is important to look at the issue, and even more important is that that the work is carried out correctly, and depending on whether it's an investment property or residential property, there are different tax implications, and that is the point. So to help break all of this down, we've got Sam Saad, who is back. He's the partner and owner of Clinch Woodbridge Lawyers at clw.com.au. And good morning, Sam. Welcome back to the Real Estate Podcast.
Morning, Craig. Thank you for having me back.
So, as I mentioned, there are people that haven't really given this that much thought. So why not tell people out there why people are currently restructuring their assets?
Good point, Craig. Look, one of the reasons why people are restructuring their assets is the current economic climate is quite uncertain at the moment. So people are doing everything they can to try and protect everything they have. One of the biggest drivers of that is the fact that there's increased interest rates going on in Australia at the moment where they're flying through the roof. So people are predominantly restructuring to make sure that they can protect their businesses and make sure their cash flow keeps coming in. And secondly, and probably most importantly, is to protect their home, their family home, make sure that that's, isolated from anything else. And if there is any collateral damage, that doesn't get affected.
Yeah, because it's very easy, I guess, to just kind of forget about the family home. I think so many people forget to actually protect their assets, which is a good point that you're making.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes people think about this a little too late. When everything comes falling down, they start to think about it. By that time, you don't really have the chance or opportunity to make sure you got the necessary things in place to protect that home.
And Sam, in these current times that we live in, what are people doing to protect their family home and properties from businesses?
People are doing a few things at the moment. One of the things that they are doing is usually they have one party in the relationship who is running the business. So what they often do is either move the family home into their spouse's name, who's not the active one or person that's in the business. That allows a bit of separation from the business to the house. On other occasions, they're also setting up separate companies for different investment purchases so that if one of the properties doesn't go as well as they expect it to, it won't have the collateral damage that it does on the other properties or the other investments that they have in place. And one of the final structures that they're doing is that they're setting up trusts to make sure that assets are protected within that trust structure so that in the event things go down, those assets can't be accessed.
Yeah, so there's a lot to think about in this space. So let's look at the whole issue around transferring property, because again, this is in part of what you're talking about. What is involved in transferring a property to a related party?
Look, Craig, there's a few things that you need to consider when transferring to a related party. One of the first things is because it's not an arm's length transaction, you need to make sure that there's a valuation in place. You can't just transfer it to a related party without having some consequences of things such as stamp duty. You also need to make sure you have the money for stamp duty. If it's a related party transaction, sometimes, for example, if it's the family home, you can move it to your husband or wife without having to pay any stamp duty, or at least 50% of it. So there might be some ways around that. One of the final things you got to look at as well is bank consent. Whilst you may have all your loans in place, the bank's not going to let you to move a loan to someone else's name without having their approval. And sometimes that could weaken your asset position or could weaken your cash flow position. If you're putting the name, for example, in your husband or wife's name that doesn't work, then it could lead to, no income on that basis, and the bank may refuse it.
And some people also, just with relation to stamp duty, some people might ask this question, and that is, stamp duty, is it worth the stamp duty and other costs to actually go down that road for a restructure?
Well, it depends on, the circumstances and funds that you have available. For example, I've recently had a builder client of mine who's moved basically his home and two of his other properties out of his name to his wife's name to make sure that he's able to protect those assets in the event something goes on with any future projects. The stamp duty amount was definitely worth the payment versus what the risk would be, or if someone sued him for $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 or more, the stamp duty in that circumstance was a lot smaller, so it's worth it. But you also need to think when you move assets, under bankruptcy laws, there's relation back periods. So sometimes they could limit the fact that you can or can't move assets in certain circumstances. So you need to make sure you plan early to make sure these restructures happen properly.
Yeah, it's so important what you're saying, because I guess you've seen this where people have come to see you. It's too late. The business has fallen. The bank wants the money and the house is going out the door.
Yeah, that's right, Craig. And look, it's often too late when people come at that stage to protect the house or the things that they need most, which is why it's important to spend that money early and make sure you have the right structuring in place to protect your assets. It may cost you a little bit up front, but in the long run, it'll save you all those losses that you could potentially have.
Oh yeah, it's going to save you pain. It's going to save you money. All those key things that make your life just a little bit better every day. Sam, great to chat this morning. I'll let you get on with it. And thanks for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast.
Thanks for having me on again, Craig. Cheers.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.